All right, thank you. So my name is Conrad. Welcome to my talk. So this is a talk on Sysmon. I'm sure you know Sysmon. It is from Microsoft Sysinternals. It adds a lot of amazing logging now to your Windows environment. The Sysmon logs play nicely with all your SIMs, Splunk, ArcSight, whatever, Elastic, of course, you know. And it gives you that necessary visibility, right? So, you know, there's an old saying that I quote a lot by Brandeis. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? You need to find out where the blind spots are. You need to find out where you can't see things and add that visibility. And malware, especially recent malware, has been very good at moving kind of quietly through these blind spots in your network, right? So this it's a Microsoft tool. It's not installed natively, but it does play nicely with, of course, you know, your SIM. And it scales globally, by the way. A lot of common questions we get on Sysmon. Will it scale to a large enterprise? You bet. Microsoft runs it globally. So it does scale to a very large environment. So it gives you some new logs now, and one of the best things you can do with this, of course, is generate hashes. So you can get a hash of every single process running in your entire environment. That's an amazing functionality, right? Normally you need a tool like a Tanium or a Carbon Black or a SentinelOne to get that kind of deep level insight into every single process running in your environment, right? So that kind of visibility is critical. And grabbing the hash of every running process is a really, really useful thing for, of course, you know, hunting malware. Once you have, say, the SHA-256 hash, you can then upload that to Virustotal, get, you know, dozens of vendors, 60-odd vendors' opinions on that hash, and we'll talk about the amazing imphash. Imphash, the import hash, is a really key feature that allows you to chase and hunt down related families of malware. And I'll show you an example. We took Mimikatz, we made some trivial changes to it, and got most antivirus vendors, you know, to fail to detect it, even though it was Mimikatz. Of course, Mimikatz is a tool that dumps your plaintext passwords, your hashes, your tokens, things like that, right? So malware is pretty good at making this polymorphic code where they'll make trivial changes. The functionality is exactly the same, but the actual signature is different, right? And that traditionally has thrown off antivirus vendors as a simple, you know, parlor trick, but imphash can help you chase down that stuff. A lot of capabilities here. And Mark Rasinovich, who runs Sysinternals, you know, Sysinternals was a separate company, of course. Microsoft acquired them a number of years ago. And we're worried that Microsoft would, you know, embrace and extend, you know, Sysinternals, meaning ruin them, of course. Sometimes the big fish eats the little fish, and, you know, the little fish dies. But in this case, Sysinternals has been great. It's been really improved. And he's really good at going tactical. When we saw malware like Petya and NotPetya, they started moving through new ways, at least for malware, through like things like WMIC, the Windows Management Instrumentation Console, right? Which has virtually no useful native logging whatsoever. WMIC natively supports debug logging, which is terrible from an operational standpoint, from a detection standpoint. It's really not terribly useful operationally or advisable to turn on WMIC logging, say, globally. That would be very expensive. You could harm operations. And so Mark Rasinovich saw that Petya and NotPetya was moving through tools like WMIC. These tools had very useful native logging for our SIM, for our SOC, and he added WMIC logging to Sysmon, like a few weeks after Petya started using that, right? And of course, we know these malware variants, Petya, NotPetya. NotPetya is now estimated to have caused over $10 billion in damages. $10 billion, one strand of malware. And moving through these fairly secret channels, so Mark's been very tactical, adding features to Sysmon, allowing us to actually see, if not prevent that malware ideally, but at least detect it when it starts moving, right? So here's imphash. It's an interesting take from Mandiant. They're like, okay, instead of hashing the signature, which is trivial, I could flip one bit in that binary, and suddenly the SHA-256 hash no longer matches. What if instead of hashing the signature of the binary, what if we actually hash the list of DLLs that are loaded, the names of them, and the order they're loaded in, right? So instead of just getting the SHA-256 hash, among other hashes, of course, that Sysmon supports, let's hash the list of the DLLs in the order they're loaded. This allows you to catch related families of malware. So if someone takes a piece of code like Mimikatz, as you're going to see I did, right? Makes some trivial changes to it, the imphash is going to be the same. Now, of course, we have this thing we talk about called the perfect solution fallacy. The perfect solution fallacy is when you have a good idea, like, hey, let's fight malware, let's track malware by tracking the imphash. Someone will often raise their hand and go, well, of course the nation state would change the list of the DLLs, they'd rearrange the order, they'd add a different one in just to throw that off. Of course. We call that the perfect solution fallacy. The perfect solution fallacy is a fallacy because it states a solution is not useful unless it's perfect in all use cases. And of course we don't believe that. If we believe that, we wouldn't use firewalls, we wouldn't use antivirus, we wouldn't use anything because everything fails. That's why we have defense in depth. So sometimes you come back to work on Monday, you have these ideas for new things to try. Someone might try to shoot them down, not because they're bad ideas, simply because they're different, right? People like to fight change. Some people, IT people build entire careers fighting change. These people are actually harmful and toxic in your environment. They think they're well-intended, but it's mainly a fight for status quo, and as I've told many of my clients, status quo isn't working. So let's look at Mandiant M-Trend. Speaking of Mandiant. So, of course, Mimikatz allows you. It's by Benjamin Delpy. Hilariously, Benjamin Delpy wanted to teach himself how to program, and Mimikatz was his project. Well, mission accomplished, my friend, right? You got it done, right? So he wanted to teach himself how to program. He wrote Mimikatz. This tool was so explosive. It initially was closed source. It was so explosive that he was invited to a conference. I won't mention the country. He was invited to a conference in a foreign country. If you Google Mimikatz Wired magazine, you'll see this article. He was invited to a conference in a certain foreign country, and back when Mimikatz was closed source. It's now open source, of course. But he was invited to a conference in a foreign country. His internet went out. He went down to the front desk, leaving his laptop behind. The front desk kept stalling. He went back in his room and found someone in the middle of what we call black bag operation. They were typing furiously on his keyboard, trying to get the code. He's like, hey, what's up? The guy's like, oh, sorry, wrong room, and just storms out. So some nation state wanted him so badly, they lured him to that country under the guise of a free trip to a conference, and they try to steal Mimikatz, right? So interesting. So it does a lot of things on Windows 8 and lower especially. It's very, very useful. Plaintext Credentials in RAM. So we have tools now, like Petya and NotPetya, who are injecting Mimikatz into the system, dumping the plaintext passwords, and using that to move laterally, right? And we predicted, I've talked to Seth and other SANS instructors for years, we predicted for years that malware was going to get smart. Most malware was tremendously dumb in the past, right? You saw worms like Conficker, and the way they pivoted was they'd launch an exploit for Conficker as MS08067. You'd own the box, and then it would keep launching exploits that lots more boxes. So you have 1,000 systems, 2 unpatched for that patch, MS08067. 2 went down, end of story. Pen tester gets a lot more than 2, though. The pen tester gets a whole lot more than 2. Why? We own those 2. We get system ideally on those boxes, and then we inject Mimikatz, and we dump the usernames, the hashes, the passwords, the security access tokens, and others, and we steal credentials and move laterally, right? That's how human pen testers move, right? Malware never moved like that until about 2 years ago. The alleged NSA hacking toolkit leaked. Malware combined the NSA hacking toolkit, MS-17010 against SMB, of course, Eternal Blue, married that with a human-style pivoting campaign, and $10 billion from one strain of malware, right? So let's look at Mimikatz. It's an important thing to detect, of course, in your SOC. And they're saying a lot of people alter Mimikatz. A lot of these nation states, criminal actors, crime gangs, they'll alter Mimikatz in often trivial ways to avoid detection. So I was in my lab, and I was reading about this, and I thought, well, how hard is that? How hard is it to alter Mimikatz to evade antivirus detection? So I downloaded Mimikatz from Benjamin Delpy's site, the actual EXE, 70% detection, right? Pretty good. And then I compiled from source. I made no changes whatsoever. I simply compiled it from source, and over half the vendors can no longer detect Mimikatz. I hadn't changed a single line of anything. I simply used this nation-state tool called a compiler. Ooh, that dude used a compiler. Wow, And I was so clear. I am no Windows software expert on that front. Like, I'm not a Windows developer. I've compiled thousands of things on Linux and Unix. I can't remember the last time I compiled anything on Windows. Like, I literally had to Google free Microsoft compiler. That's what a noob I am on this front. Oh, Visual Studio. Okay, I can do that, I'm sure I compiled something back in the Bourland C++ days or something, but it was a million years ago, right? So I Google, free Microsoft compiler, Windows compiler, download a compile, and over half the antivirus vendors are flummoxed by that nation-state ha-ha move, right? And then I changed Mimikatz to Mimi Dogs, and I got 7% AV detection. I was literally giggling like a little kid in my office. I changed cat to dog. That's all I did. That's all I did, and most of the vendors are gone. And if I haven't convinced you that blacklisting antivirus is largely, it catches the ankle biters. That's what it does, right? Now, of course, the vendors have moved on. They've added heuristics, so they had to. But just a static scan of a binary is a pretty weak test on that front, right? And as you see here, this dog can hunt. My password on this system was, this passphrase is uncrackable, which was a great password until I showed it to all you folks, right? But I trust you. Don't worry about it, right? So again, Windows 8 and lower, unless you've changed them, Plaintext Credentials sitting in RAM. Oh, Windows 8, end of life in January. TikTok, right? Windows 7, sorry, Windows 7. Windows 7, end of life in January. TikTok on that. If you haven't begun your Windows 7, replacement project, well, get going, okay? Hilariously, so I uploaded to Virustotal, and a few hours later, Kaspersky was now hot in the trail of the notorious hacking tool called Mimidogs, right? Which has never existed anywhere except that laptop and Virustotal, right? A few hours later, 13. A few days later, 26. Your corporate antivirus today has a signature for Mimidogs, and that's my way of saying hi to my homies. How's it going, right? Conrad says hi, right? And, some people complain about, the economy. I'm growing the economy. I'm a jobs creator, right? I'm creating jobs. So then, hilariously, my pen test friends started emailing me saying, hey, Eric, can you make me a Mimi something, but don't upload it to Virustotal because I don't want them to know. I'm like, hey, special orders don't upset us. Of course. I'm a service-oriented company. So I made Mimi apes and Mimi pigs, and I also made Mimi yaks because I thought yaks was clearly funnier than even dogs. We can all agree on that, right? Mimi yaks is clearly funnier. So even though Kaspersky had figured out Mimi dogs, they hadn't figured out Mimi yaks because they changed 3 more letters, right? If you're wondering how much work it takes to pull off this nation-state style attack, you're seeing the sum total of the effort there on the top screen. Now, that's a bit of old-school command line kung fu. I'm an old-school Unix admin. So what I did was I made a temporary directory. I unzipped the source code. I renamed 2 directories, the 2 moves, or 2 renames, right, from cat to yak. I did a recursive find to rename every file from cat to yak. That leaves the substrings, right? How do I change a string in every file? The obvious way is to open it up in an editor and edit them. I'm too lazy to do that. I'm not going to do that, right? So instead I do a streaming edit. I tar everything up, which just combines all those files into one big blob. I send it to a streaming edit, flipping cat to yak, and then I save the file, then I compile. So I made a whole bunch of these for my friends, my pen test friends, and they were this one I uploaded, the rest I didn't. I didn't upload Mimi apes, I didn't upload Mimi pigs, I didn't, etc. Gave them my pen test friends. They got 7% detection or so, and they use them to their great advantage, right? But imphash isn't fooled by this. Imphash isn't fooled at all. So when you use a tool like Sysmon, and you grab the running hashes of every process, I can easily evade your SHA-1 check, or your SHA-256 check. However, the imphash check is going to take more work. Again, perfect solution fallacy, I can evade that too. But if I'm making simple changes to programs to evade antivirus detection, which is how most antivirus works today, or most malware works today, the imphash will catch me. So imphash is a very useful feature out of Mandiant. I recommend, well, installing Sysmon, of course, but grabbing the imphash. And if you have a piece of malware, hunt for that imphash, just in case there's related variants that you're not recognizing as a related variant. You can catch it that way. Very, very useful. I've just begun, basically research on imphash. I think the potential is huge and currently largely untapped. So let's use that. Sysmon gets you that for free. You can also do some other hunting through Sysmon, of course. You can look for unsigned stuff. Now, is an unsigned binary always malicious? No. Is a signed binary always clean? No, of course not. Malware authors can sign their binaries too. But unsigned is interesting, right? Unsigned is worth looking at, right? Most malware is unsigned. Now, any malware author can buy a code signing cert, or they can steal one, perhaps, But if you're hunting through data and you're wondering what to focus on in your SOC, things that are unsigned are useful to look for. Also, you can say, okay, don't show me anything signed by Microsoft. Don't show me anything signed by Oracle. Don't show me anything signed by Google, whatever, right? Again, all this data feeds in through native Windows event logging. You've already got a SOC that's already, a SIM that's already ingesting that stuff somehow. It's pretty easy to actually search on this stuff and do threat hunting through data. Like a lot of people view threat hunting as a NSM exercise, a network security monitoring exercise. We've always hunted through packets. If you've done IDS work, we've always hunted through packets. But a lot of SOCs don't hunt through their CSM, which is continuous security monitoring. Simply put, NSM is data in motion, and CSM is data at rest. Network security monitoring, continuous security monitoring, right? And we've always threat hunted through NSM, but I see plenty of SOCs who aren't doing any threat hunting through CSM, through their actual log files, right? So add that threat centricity, and when you go hunting, again, unsigned binaries or signed binaries by vendors you don't trust or recognize is a useful step. If you don't do Sysmon, you can still get a lot of this goodness through Event 4688. I know almost every talk I mention this because it's that good. 4688, the security log, you've already got that log, but you don't have the full command line unless you made those two changes, right? If you make those two changes, you get the entire command line, right? And Sysmon gives you a whole lot more than that, including WMIC logging, registry logging, and a whole lot more. But if you want kind of the light version of that without making a big change in your environment, simply tweaking 4688 to give you the full command line. As I've said previously, if you put a gun in my head and gave me one log file, this would be it in a SOC. I want more than this, but I only get one. This is the one I want. So let's look at how malware has evolved. What I showed you previously was an actual fat exe, mimiyax.exe, mimidogs.exe. And your corporate antivirus has done a really good job at killing that stuff, right? It's done a really good job at killing that stuff. And so malware, of course, is evolving. If your garden variety antivirus is going to squash some piece of malware, and it's an advanced piece of malware, they're going to evolve to avoid that. So we've gone fileless now, right? A lot of malware coming in through PowerShell. PowerShell, I love how people wring their hands over PowerShell being used for malware. When clients, I see online on Twitter, people suggesting we somehow block PowerShell. It's like, come on. Saying malware moves through PowerShell on Windows is like saying malware uses Bash on Linux. No one ever thought about deleting Bash as a result, right? So we need to get that sunlight onto PowerShell. We need to secure PowerShell and understand how the malware is using PowerShell. The malware is living off the land. We call these things lol bins now, right? Living off the land binaries, lol bins. And malware has learned, and good pen testers have learned, don't install malware, just use what's there, right? PowerShell is going to be whitelisted if there is whitelisting. PowerShell is going to run in some form, right? So let's live off the land. Good pen testers do that, and advanced malware does that too. Here's Metasploit, fileless model. So instead of saving some .exe to the file system, as I showed you earlier, we won't save anything to the file system. We won't save a byte. We'll just use this giant long command line. So a lot of malware does this, or the NetWeb download client string. Have this giant command line that's compressed into base64 encoded, convert to base64, uncompress it, run it, right? So it's 2,400 bytes long, it's massive, and natively in a Windows environment, you don't log any of this unless you've added Sysmon or you've added logging for event 4688, right? So it's also invisible. Your antivirus does a weaker job of this because nothing's saved, and there's nothing logged unless you've made those changes we talked about. So again, very common thing, fileless now. We often see Powershell launched by CMD. That's another very typical maneuver by malware. How often does one of your programmers open up CMD, a terminal, and then type PowerShell.exe inside that terminal? Not common for a person to do that, but lots of malware do like CMD/C, PowerShell.exe, blah, 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 invoke expression, and off we go, right? When you uncompress and convert the base64 back, you get this giant blob. I recognize that's a bit of an eye chart. It is by design. And just impress upon you how much is going on there, right? All those function names are randomly generated on the fly. They are, quote, high entropy function names, meaning they're randomly generated to avoid any kind of blacklisting. If I call my function evil function, evil function, whatever, some vendor's going to look for the string evil function. So they generate it on the fly, randomly high entropy strings. Oh, shout out to Mark Baggett, by the way. He wrote a tool called freak.py to do frequency analysis. Directly as a result of taking 511 with Seth, we're trying to find a programmatic way to detect that kind of stuff. Detect randomly generated exe names, randomly generated domain names, domain generation algorithms. Me and Seth looked at it. We didn't get very far. And Mark Baggett figured that out, and it's called freak.py. You feed it a corpus of data, like Windows exe names from your install image, and it tells you how likely other names, how similar other names are to that or unsimilar. And you find the ones that seem very unlikely based on your existing names. Works really well to detect that kind of stuff. Again, lots of advantages. Set execution policy is not a security control. If you're wringing your hands about allowing PS1 files to run, there's all kinds of ways to run PS1 files without triggering this. And what I just showed you works fine. So set execution policy is not a security control. It's not going to protect you from any pen tester or any semi-intelligent malware. Just a quick review on Deep Blue CLI. I've talked about this before, but I am updating it now in preparation for the final DerbyCon right here in Louisville in September. So the final DerbyCon is happening in September. I'm updating that talk now. I'm updating that tool now. So I'll be there either way, but I very much hope to speak there as well in September. So I'll see you there. It's a tool I wrote for DerbyCon a couple years ago. I've given a couple of talks on it. I've updated it a bunch. And it's a way to basically threat hunt through Windows event logs, right? So one thing that, it's interesting in SOCs, I've said this before, if no one in your SOC is scripting, you have a substandard SOC. And that's a very unpopular statement, but I stand by it. If no one in your SOC can or does script, you have a substandard SOC. And I literally was speaking in Miami last year. My wife came with me, because it was January in Miami, and we live in Maine, And I said that in a room about this big. And my wife was sitting in the back, and people started kind of quietly booing and muttering when I said that. They didn't like when I said, if no one in your SOC is scripting, you have a substandard SOC, because they had, a substandard SOC, The reason people don't want people scripting in SOCs is they want people in SOCs to be 22 years old, all of them. Now, hey, if it's 80% 22-year-old kids, no problem at all. If it's 100%, that's not going to work, right? So adding some scriptability is a key element in your SOC, right? And whether you use Deep Blue CLI or take some ideas from Deep Blue CLI, I was in the SOC for one of the world's largest retailers, and they kind of took Deep Blue CLI, looked at the things that it was doing that they weren't doing, and added it to their tool, meaning that they scripted it, they used Python in their SOC, they used Elastic, and they added the functionality. So whether you use Deep Blue CLI directly or take ideas from it, I'm happy. Whatever value you get from that, that's great. A lot of stuff it catches, including, of course, Sysmon. And so basically years of threat hunting experience defending networks over years. DeepWhite we're going to talk about, actually discuss next, sorry. And a lot of good threat hunting goodness, boiled down to one tool. The native visibility you get out of Sysmon, of course, Event 4688, and other events as well. So it'll also do that. So when you show that big, giant compressed command, it'll recognize that. It'll actually unwind it. So it'll see its base 64. It'll decode the base 64 automatically. It'll see it's compressed after that. It'll decompress it, right? And then it'll scan the stuff below that, right? And it's funny, Daniel Bohannon has this invoke obfuscation tool. Invoke obfuscation is scary. If you haven't checked that tool out, look at it. And invoke obfuscation really kind of, it makes keyword searches, pattern matches pretty much useless, right? There's all kinds of ways to chop, slice, and dice that stuff. Another thing Deep Blue does is it looks for obfuscated commands statistically. So it says, okay, what percentage of normal characters is in this command line? If you see invoke obfuscation, there's all these backticks and weird octal characters or whatever, binary characters. And it says, okay, what's the percentage of normal alpha in this command? If it's above a certain threshold, below a certain threshold, alert on that. So it also detects obfuscated commands, not by patterns, because that's not going to work, but by statistics, right? Again, I'll unwind that stuff automatically. And here's some of this nasty malware we're seeing now. Human-style pivoting, right? So human-style pivoting, where it gets into a box, so you're missing one, you got 1,000 systems, 2 unpatched, right? 10 years ago, malware hit 2, that was it, right? Now malware hits 2, uploads Mimikatz, dumps the usernames, dumps the hashes, dumps the plaintext passwords, steals the security access tokens, right? The security access token is what grants your domain privileges to the local process, if you're a domain user, and uses that to move laterally, right? And Wired Magazine had another great article on the shipping company Maersk. So Maersk got hit with NotPetya, and their entire AD infrastructure globally was taken down within minutes, right? Their entire Active Directory infrastructure was taken down within minutes. They had no viable backup, right? And the only reason they survived that was an act of God. There was a power outage in Ghana when it happened. So when the malware hit, there was a power outage in Ghana, and an Active Directory controller was offline. The only remaining copy of that database was sitting in a powered-down PC in Ghana. So they called Ghana and said, unplug everything now before the power comes back, and grab those disks and fly to London. and they couldn't fly to London due to a visa issue, so someone from London had to fly to Nigeria, someone from Ghana had to fly to Nigeria, they met in the middle, they handed the disks off, they went back to London, they recovered their AD infrastructure globally from that, right? It was crazy, crazy malware, and they were impacted. They alone lost billions of dollars. And Maersk does those giant shipping containers, right? And you've seen them all over the world, I'm sure. And you've got like 18-wheelers backed up for miles at ports. The whole thing was crippled. They fell back to paper and pencil managing that stuff, right? And people would call them, customers would call them, saying, I got all this food in these containers that's rotting. We just missed our Christmas shipment. We just missed this. We just missed that. We're losing millions. And Maersk said, okay, how much did you lose? $1.2 million? Blank check here. They were literally handing out checks just because they had to survive a couple of things. They had to survive the malware. They had to survive the lawyers, too. You know, there was a lot of attacks coming in them from malware, legal front, getting sued. So they could have lost the company due to a lot of reasons. They were literally just handing out checks to survive that issue, right? And that's what this malware is doing now. One gets in, it can be quite destructive. Of course, there's a series of mistakes that led to that involving their credentials, manually synchronized local admin passwords, et cetera, but it was damaging, right? And the city of Atlanta got hit with SAMSAM, right? So NotPetya was not ransomware. It was destructive malware. It simply destroyed your systems. There was no ransom to pay. SAMSAM is ransomware. So SAMSAM allows you to get the data back or get the key to unencrypt your data. So it encrypts everything, holds the key hostage, right? If you have bad backups, well, you know, game over, right? I'll give credit to the city of Atlanta. They refused to pay the ransom. You know, they recovered normally, which was a lot more expensive than actually paying the ransom. And there's a moral issue there, right? There's an ethical issue there, right? Do you pay these criminals this money, because where does that money go? They held firm and they recovered, but they were crippled for certainly weeks and longer, right? And it moves to WMI and PSExec, which offers, again, virtually no useful logging unless you've installed Sysmon. Here's an example Powershell Command I'm going to track now. Why am I using this? Because it's a very common way. You know, I've shown you now 3 ways to run Mimikatz, right? There was the fat exe name way, which your antivirus does a good job of detecting today, generally. There was the Metasploit way, which is the giant compressed command line way, and base64 encoded. And there's also the invoke expression way. Invoke expression does a kind of a wget style download, run this thing on the fly, right? PowerShell is going to be there in any recent system, of course, right? Nothing's logged natively, again, unless you change some stuff. Added PowerShell logging or Sysmon logging or event 4688. And again, Sunlight is the best disinfectant. This works really well. And here's a log that's created. So this is event, so this is event 4688 right here. And if you turn on the full command line auditing, you get the whole thing. It's right there. It's a piece of cake to find if you're looking for it, right? It's not hard to find this stuff. Again, there are ways to obfuscate, but it's not hard to find this stuff, right? And so WMIC is interesting. Give a shout out to Ed Scotus. I was trying to figure this stuff out. There's an old saying, do what I mean, right? Do what I mean. It's not working. Do what I mean, you know? And I wasn't seeing any output because it's outputting on the remote system. So I'm running commands. I'm running Mimikatz. I'm not seeing any output. The output's being displayed remotely. So you can do a trick where you basically create a share and have it logged to the share if you want to grab those credentials, of course, right? And here it is here. You don't actually see the output. But as you see here, you know, I ran the command, and I dumped the creds to a share. And then I opened up that share, of course, that file in the share, to read the credentials. Here it is here. So cpwn mimi.txt, there it is right there. And here's the event log view. Very common for tools like Powersploit to use this encoded command. So if you have a SIM that can't decode this, you're in trouble. So I gave my talk on Deep Blue CLI at DerbyCon. I came off the stage, and you know, a whole bunch of questions. Like, well, I want company, you know, I paid $300,000 for company X's SIM, and how do I do the Deep Blue CLI style stuff? How do I like decode that? Some SIMs can, some SIMs can't, you know? Some SIMs will going to limit you to basic keyword search. And a keyword search, you know, saying, you know, base64 encoded command is going to be very noisy, right? Plenty of non-malicious things do that, right? So I'm like, well, grab the Windows event log and parse the XML. And the guy's like, well, you know, my tool can't do that. Well, how about this? Well, my tool can't do that. How about this? My tool can't do that. I said, how much did you pay for that tool? $300,000. I'm like, well, maybe it's time for a moment of introspection. You know, if my free script can do it, you know, again, back to the scripting angle, right? Programming, right? or having vendor tools that can do this kind of stuff. Of course, some vendors can. I'm not throwing that stone, but some can't, right? So, but programming allows you to kind of marry those two worlds, right? So here's Deep Blue CLI versus these, right? And we have notice it scans it. The first one's easy. It scans it twice, right? So it says, okay, we got a suspicious command line, download via NetWeb download client string. We got Mimikatz, etc. The second one's a bit more interesting. It says, I've got a lot of base64 encoded characters, so why don't I decode that automatically, right? So it decodes that automatically and then rescans that normalized content. Now it has that string. It sees, invoke object, NetWeb, invoke expression rather, NetWeb download client string, etc. All right, so I was wondering how to leverage the goodness that Sysmon gives us, and especially those hashes, because again, that kind of visibility, to see the running hash, the hash of every running process in your entire company, that's powerful visibility. Again, you don't normally get that with a tool like Tanium or Carbon Black. And how can I leverage that, right? And we had a slide in 5.11, Security 5.11 for years, say, hey, here's an idea. Use Sysmon Event 1, grab the running hash, grab the hash from every running process, send that to Virustotal for free, by the way. There's a free API to do that. And check it out. And we had that slide for a long time. And then I thought, well, how about I just write that script? Why don't I do that, right? So I did that. Turns out Virustotal has a free API. You can pay for more access, but you can get one submission every 15 seconds for free, right? And obviously people are hesitant to send files to Virustotal because hundreds of thousands of researchers / security companies have access to that spool. So a lot of people are hesitant to send files to Virustotal for privacy reasons. I get that. But the hash is safer that way, right? So send the hash and basically generate a whitelist. So take your Windows 10 install image, grab the SHA-256 hash of every exe on that thing, right? That's your whitelist. And then what DeepWhite says, okay, check the whitelist. If it's not in the whitelist, look it up. If it's malicious, obviously tell you, right? And once I've looked it up, don't look it up again, right? Unless you want me to, then I will, right? And so what happens is, even in large environments, we've tested this out, DeepWhite will get busy for a bit, because of course you have things that are not on your install image. Chrome updated since then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you've got things that aren't on your install image, but even in a large environment, you probably got hundreds, maybe thousands, but probably not hundreds of thousands of those things, unless you're a huge shop, right? You've got hundreds of thousands of new things that aren't on your install image. Fine. Virustotal, DeepWhite will start submitting. If it has more than one to submit, it'll sleep 15 seconds, right? And it'll kind of churn through that queue. And you get 60-odd antivirus vendors' opinion on that binary. And it is magic, man. It is magic. All free tools. All that was free, right? And by the way, for my DerbyCon talk, I'm going to add this functionality, unless someone's done it yet. Someone, Mike pours a line on this. Every script you thought about writing, someone's already written it. Just go find it, So if someone may have done this, but I'm going to take bro / they renamed bro to Zeek, of course, Take Zeek logs and do the same thing with Zeek is my idea. Unless someone beat me to the punch. In that case, I'll just talk about the awesome stuff they did, right? But Zeek, the newly renamed bro was named after the IDS, after Big Brother. Big Brother's watching you. Then, of course, it got associated with bro culture, which was not their goal at all. So they renamed it Zeek in honor of the dog from the Far Side cartoons, which is awesome, right? So now Zeek, now we say bro Zeek, just like we say SSL TLS now, right? And, but Zeek can also auto-carve EXEs, grab the hash, submit the Virustotal is my idea. Unless someone beat me to it, in which case they're awesome, right? And this works really, really well. And so basically, there's an old saying from programming, if you typed it twice, you should have scripted it once, right? That's old school Unix sysadmin, wisdom. So I've manually done this more than once, I can tell you that. Manually grab the Sysmon log, manually grab that hash, manually copy, manually paste into Virustotal, look. And that, of course, is Mimikatz, right? And so I've done that more than once, and I finally scripted it. Of the various hashes I tried, I mean, you see, as I mentioned previously, Sysmon does all kinds of hashes. SHA-256 seems to be a good trade-off between security and usability and portability. Now, here's Mimikatz. Now, don't freak out if you get a 1 hit or 2 hits like I did, okay? So I got 1 hit, and this 1 hit was from the Security 5.11 Windows VM we've handed out to thousands of students, right? So I run DeepWhite on the Security 5.11 Windows VM. It gets a hit, and I start hyperventilating. I'm like, it's infected. I've given this to thousands of people. Like, I need, my career's over. I need to, like, get a new name and change my identity. And my mind was racing ahead to all the failure. I'm like, well, wait a minute, 1 hit? What is that? What is? So don't hyperventilate. I mean, obviously research the thing, right? But don't completely lose your mind like I started to if you get 1 hit, right? And so why do you get 1 hit? Well, Sophos doesn't like PS exec. Now, admittedly, well, it's a PUA, a potentially unwanted application, but it flags as a virus. And it's not a virus, but I mean, PS exec, bad things have happened to it, but it's not a bad program. It's just bad things are done to it, okay? So take that with a grain of salt. Also, sometimes, I don't know who the hacker is. The only time I see the hacker is when they're not detecting something or they're falsing on something. That's the only time I notice them on that list. But anyways, I'm not sure what they're doing over there, but if it's not signed, they crank up the heuristics, right? So the piece of software is not signed. The heuristics are cranked up to 11. Does Microsoft sign everything? No. They sign almost everything. Now they sign everything just about, but there's a few older things, .NET framework stuff, whatever, that might not be signed. So clearly give it more scrutiny, but if I download it from Microsoft.com, I'm not terribly worried about it, right? All right, so let's shift gears a bit. Sigma. So we have this kind of Tower of Babel now, where I mentioned we have NSM, and we have CSM, and we've got Splunk. We've got Splunk or ArcSight or Elastic, all great tools, all different syntax. On the NSM side, we've got Snort, Suricata, which have pretty much the same rule language, but then you get Brozeek, which is totally different, right? And you want to search for this one thing. I want to find Mimikatz in Splunk. I want to find Mimikatz in ArcSight. I want to find Mimikatz in Elastic. I want to find Mimikatz on Snort or Suricata or Bro. And you end up having to hire all these experts who know all that stuff. Now, maybe you probably have one major SIM, like a major commercial vendor, but you might have two. A lot of SOCs I see have the tactical SIM, right? So the compliance people insist, if you go in a SOC and they're bragging about how many millions of events they handle per day, that's the wrong SOC. That's the wrong mentality. It should be quality, not quantity, right? And so I do see SOCs with two SIMs, right? You get the compliance SIM, which the compliance officers love, and you're handling 10 million events per day, right? And often these things, it's not the vendor's fault. The budget wasn't big enough, too much data was thrown at that thing, and it's slow, right? So you do on some of these big vendor searches, you do the search, get a cup of coffee, come back, the search completes, right? That's the compliance SIM. And I've been in SOCs, I'm like, hey, how about we have less data in that SIM? How about we start stripping stuff up? Like, no, Eric, we need this for compliance purposes. This is our compliance engine. I'm like, well, if it takes 5 minutes to make a search, compliance is now harming security. It's actively harming security, right? And I was at a SOC once, and it was just like that. 7 minutes for a search, handling 10 million events per day, and I'm walking through that SOC, and on the screen, I see Security Onion, the new Elastic version of Security Onion. I'm like, ooh, cool, Security Onion, I love that. What is it? He goes, shh, shh, shh. He shushes me. He goes, don't tell anyone. I'm like, what? Don't tell anyone you saw that. I'm like, why? If management finds out we're using this, they'll take it away and make us use that awful thing. And we don't want to. We don't want to. So what happened? They literally went and kind of begged, borrowed, stole hardware, put it in a closet, literally hid the server, and the compliance SIM got 10 million events per day, and Security Onion got like 1% of that, right? And what they would do, they'd use Security Onion day to day, and when they found something they needed the deep dive on the compliance data, they made the deep dive, right? So day to day, tactically, they use the tactical SIM, then deep dive on the giant compliance repository, right? And that's how they got through the day. Now, I'm not saying on a whiteboard, draw two SIMs, no one would do that, but hey, if that's what gets it done in that environment, given the politics and the regulations and everything, fine. But now you get two SIMs to search on, two sets of logic, two syntaxes, etc. So we have this Tower of Babel style stuff, and it's hard to, I want a Splunk expert with 5 years experience. That's going to be expensive. It's going to be expensive, right? Because those people are in massive demand for obvious reason, right? So how do you kind of manage this? And this tool, Sigma, it's the kind of tool, it's like, why didn't I think of that? I already wrote Deep Blue CLI. I was like close to that, But this is just genius. It's just genius. What if we come up with like a universal language of a piece of malware? We have a universal language for a piece of malware, right? And we kind of distill it down to its elements, right? And we write this kind of, this meta rule describing Mimikatz or whatever, right? And then once we have the meta rule, we have a parser just generate Splunk output, or Elastic output, configuration, or up the PowerShell syntax, or grep syntax, or ArcSight syntax based on this meta rule. So write this universal rule, and then just run the parser. And it'll do an output plugin and create Splunk or ArcSight or whatever. It's really cool. Really, really good stuff. I've been playing around with it a lot, building up this talk, and man, I am quite impressed. I've already got ideas. I'm going to distill some stuff from Deep Blue CLI this thing's not doing and actually submit it over that side. I don't need you to use Deep Blue CLI. I just want to help. I just want to help detect stuff. However that happens, I'm on board with, right? So Sigma is this kind of Rosetta Stone to unlock all these languages. And it also allows more junior staff to get more done. I want some senior folks in a SOC, but it can be mostly juniors. If I have 80% juniors and 20% seniors, rock and roll, right? But it helps them move faster as well, right? So what would it take to do this? Can we distill a malicious event or software down to its elements? Describe it through strings, whatever port it's using, the registry run key it creates, whatever that thing is. Distill it down to its basics, its fundamentals. Write a rule in YAML on that, and then create these outputs, right, for Splunk, whatever, and that's Sigma. Very impressed, right? So what Snort is to network traffic, Yara is to files, right? Snort, of course, being NSM, network security monitoring, and because Snort has become the universal language. Outside of Bro/Zeek, that Snort rule is pretty universal. You can use that Snort rule in Suricata. You can use that Snort rule in a number of vendors, firewalls, next-gen firewalls, things like that. FortiGates, Fortinets, they use Snort syntax. So Snort kind of became the universal language of NSM outside of Bro/Zeek. But almost every other IDS understands Snort rules, takes Snort rules directly. So can we have something similar to that for the CSM side? We never had that. Now Sigma does that. Really nice tool. So here's that rule I talked about, right? So title office macro start CMD, and it's got a description, references, and it's using now Sysmon event 1, right? So give me Sysmon event 1, and if I see the parent image being WinWord or Excel, right? And those things launch CMD, you tell me, right? So instead of writing that, which we'll do it in Splunk in a minute, but instead of starting with the Splunk rule, or starting with the ArcSight rule, or starting with the Elastic rule, let's start with the fundamental idea, the logic of what that thing's doing. What am I actually looking for? Describe that in this kind of meta language, and then create these output plugins, right? So I'll create, once I have the Sigma rule, I'll say, give me the Splunk version of that, or the QRadar version of that, or the grep version of that, or the PowerShell version of that, right? This allows us to threat hunt across various platforms, and again, I'm quite impressed by this. It's a clean idea, it's very well executed, and even if you don't end up using Sigma, what you can do is look through the rules. I'll do a more formal demo in a bit. But here it is here, and playing around with this earlier, of course, right? So let's look at the Sysmon rules. So let's look at these. So here are the Sysmon rules. So even if you don't use Sigma, you can just look at the rules, see what it's doing. So those are all the Sysmon rules, right? Whole list of Sysmon rules for ADS, various exploits, Cobalt Strike, beaconing, Mimikatz, of course, malware dropper, password dumper, PowerShell exploit, things like that. Even if you don't use Sigma directly, you can go through the list of rules and see what they're looking for, And then, oh, that's interesting. I never thought of looking for that. WinWord launching CMD. I never thought of that, right? So there's all kinds of good threat hunting ideas in here. And of course, then you get the direct syntax to do it, which I'll show you momentarily, right? And it's not just Sysmon. There's all kinds of stuff. Yep. They come with Sigma. This is straight from great. So the question is, do these rules come with Sigma? Yeah, right from the GitHub site, And you can write your own. It's very easy to write them, actually. But these are straight from Sigma themselves. And then to your point, a lot of people end up writing their own as well, So instead of writing, if you want to write your own custom rule, you can write it in Splunk or ArcSight and Elastic, but it's probably better to write it here, this way. That way you can output it any way you want, right? Super useful stuff, right? So we got built-in rules, malware rules. Let's look at the malware ones. This is for Windows now, of course, right? And lots and lots of Sysmon rules. So again, if you turn on Sysmon logging, you get all kinds of good stuff. It's not just command line auditing. It can watch the registry. It can look for persistence mechanisms. Lots of things Sysmon can do to give you that visibility, right? So I'll come back to that momentarily. I'll run a few commands to show you how it works. So again, a plaintext YAML file. Easy schema. There's metadata, log, source, detection, and condition. And here's a kind of a rule now. Sysmon event 8. And it's called Powershell Run DLL 32 Remote Thread Creation, right? It's grabbing Sysmon event 8, which is create remote thread, right? Looking for source image PowerShell, target image run DLLs. You get PowerShell launching run DLL 32. A common way to inject DLLs. Another way to avoid antivirus, of course, is to inject DLLs straight in the RAM, right? So that's another common way. Sysmon gives you visibility into that. Oh, one note on Sysmon from a performance hit, you can log every DLL as it's loaded. That's actually useful, but that can be a performance hit. Because like PowerShell is going to load like 80 DLLs or something, right? So you can log like the hash of every single DLL loading, which is amazing visibility, but that can be a performance hit, just FYI. Sysmon runs like a dream. That's the only one to be careful of. I mean, it's a trade-off. I want that visibility, but is it worth the cost kind of a thing, right? But there's other ways too, by the remote thread creation, things like that, right? And we have classifiers now. So we have groups of products, Squid, pfSense, semantics, Snort, Windows. We have a service, we have description, and again, the list of supported outputs is pretty amazing. You probably use, you have some of these tools, whether it's PowerShell or grep, but I'm sure everyone in here has a number of these tools, maybe 3 or 4, to use. So it's pretty simple. SIGMAC, I want the output to be, the syntax to be PowerShell syntax, and I want to do Sysmon, suspend PowerShell, run DLL 32, and bang. It literally gives you a command line, a copy-paste. So you grab that command. The only thing, just a pro tip on the PowerShell stuff, it doesn't, you have to put the log in. See where it says get when event pipe to where? You have to tell it which log you want to look at, because it can process both a saved event log or the live event log, depending on how you're doing it, right? So if you save the EVTX file, put it right after the get when event, put a dash path, whatever, right? Or the live event log. So if you're copy-pasting this and you're playing around with it, you just have to tell it which event log to look at. In this case, it'd be the Sysmon log, of course, operational, et cetera, right? And that's the PowerShell syntax. Here's the Splunk syntax, right? Same exact event. And again, the beauty of this is you write one rule, and then boom. The Rosetta Stone unlocks all this stuff. Really useful stuff, right? Really useful stuff. I got a ton of ideas going through those rules. I'm sure you will as well. And also, here's Cabana, right? So here's a Cabana rule, right? And again, training, big move in Elastic now. Elastic is disrupting the SIM industry in a good way, right? A lot of vendors are adding Elastic on the back. And Elastic is basically big data for, lots of stuff, big data, open source. But a lot of IDS vendors are moving to, SIM vendors are moving that way. There's a huge demand for Elastic talent now, right? So, and a lot of companies are nervous about moving to Elastic because they don't know how to use it. They don't know the syntax. Understandably so. How do I support this thing? Who's the vendor? Again, but this helps you kind of close that gap, right? So let me do a little demo now. All right. Sysmon, let's go Ghost Pack. So I'm looking for the Sysmon Ghost Pack safetycats.yml. I'm getting the PowerShell syntax. So you can literally just copy paste this thing right in. Right into PowerShell. Just add which event log you're looking for. Or of course, let's look at the, let's just run SIGMAC to see what outputs are supported. And you have the list right here. So ArcSight, Cabana, Elastic, Graylog, grep, NetWitness, PowerShell, QRadar, Qualys, Splunk, etc. So let's do the Splunk version of that. Splunk. Pretty simple. Or the ArcSight version. You get the idea, right? Bang. And while we're here, let's look at the actual file. So here's the actual rule itself. And so it's using Sysmon event ID 11, target net file name, temp debug.bin, so that piece of malware creates that file. And there you go. All right, cool stuff. All right, I wanted to give a shout out to John Hubbard. He helped me with the Sigma stuff because it was newer to me. And I was talking to him and Justin Henderson. I'm like, hey, I got a Sysmon talk. I want to add some new sexy. And John's like, oh, I have the new sexy, right? John wrote a Blue Team Fundamentals course. Overt shout out to my friend John. Blue Team Fundamentals was born out of 511. So 511, we had MSSPs send their employees through 511, and some of them got slaughtered because they were 19 years old, you know, or 23 years old, right? We see this, you know, and we didn't, like, they didn't know what a packet was, they didn't know what ping was, and they're monitoring your events 24/7, 365 with a team of highly trained analysts. This is not all MSPs, but this is some MSPs. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. and so the MSPs trying to train them up, which is great, you know. And they took 511. They didn't know OSI. They didn't know UDP, and they were just killed. And so we have a need for onboarding people who are newer to this, right? How do we bring that person in? I was a clueless noob once myself. How do we do that? You know, how do we onboard people? And the traditional way at SANS was 301, 401, 501, but that's a lot of time and a lot of investment, and when you want a narrower skill set, right? And so, John, the beta is running, as you see there, in Crystal City. The beta is, the initial runs, it's basically half price. So go to class.tech450.com. We have some more junior folks. And thanks, folks. I'll hand it around for any questions, and thank you. Thank you.